Hey guys, before we get started, I just wanted to remind you there's a new episode of Critical Condition over at metalsucks.net. This time we tackle Liturgy's The Ark Work, coming out March 24th. It got weird. Not gonna lie, it got weird. If you'd like to watch it, feel free to follow the link in the description. Oh boy, Imagine Dragons. I actually didn't really bother buying their last album. That's to say, I didn't purchase it. That didn't stop me from hearing it all over the fucking place. But to be honest, I didn't really care for it. I mean, the songs I heard weren't what I'd call bad, but nothing ever really stuck in my head. And for an album that I constantly heard everywhere I freaking went, that sure as hell wasn't a good sign. But we're not talking about this album. We're talking about Smoke and Mirrors. How does this album stack up? Well, it opens with Shots, a bland, if not exactly unlistenable track, which is immediately followed up by Gold, another bland, if not exactly unlistenable track. But then the title track comes in, which admittedly is also bland, if not exactly unlistenable.
Oh my god, I am so fucking bored right now!
Seriously, for a band with the word imagine right there in their name, they sure have a severe lack of imagination. These songs, they all sound the same. I'm sorry, but this is an album so homogenous it gives Milk a run for its money. It's the Ned Flanders of modern rock. It takes no risks, and it's darn diddly proud of it. The overall tempo runs at a constant crawl, never rising above the speed of the average nursing home attendant, and there's almost no interesting signature changes, flair, or personality in the drumming. My god, Dave Lombardo, Alex Van Halen, Neil Peart, save me from this molasses slogging hell. Fuck, I'll settle for Meg White at this point. Just anybody but this guy, please. It's not even mentioning how fake the drums sound, but hell, every instrument on this album is so synthesized and artificially enhanced, it makes Daft Punk sound like the Circle Jerks. I mean, there's nothing raw, gritty, or daring about the instrumentation here. It's a very slick-sounding album, I'll admit that. It's extremely well-polished, but that's exactly what I fucking hate about it. It's too goddamn slick. The rampant use of auto-tuning and pitch correcting here makes all of the guitars, drums, and vocals sound like they fell out of Katy Perry's vagina. I mean, yes, I get it. That's pretty much what they're trying to do here. That's the whole idea. Not every band is trying to sound like the Bad Brains, and not every band has to. I can respect that. But for all the time they spent on polish, they spent absolutely nothing on character or depth or anything else, and believe me, the album hurts as a result of it. I mean, it's not an unpleasant sounding album, it isn't offensive in any particular way, but yeah, in a strangely ironic way, that's what I find so offensive about it. It's all style and no substance. It's a pretty sounding album, sure, but it's anything but beautiful. Placing this album besides another recent pop rock release, like, say, No Cities to Love, for example, it's like comparing Kim Kardashian to Emma Watson. I mean, they're both pretty, I guess, but one of them is also very intelligent, very passionate, and very thoughtful, on top of just being pretty. And I'll tell you this much, it sure as hell isn't the one that's soaked in freaking auto-tune. And to be absolutely fair, I can understand why this album might be appealing to some. I really can. Some people just like their music to have that bowling lane floor kind of shine to it, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I'm sorry, this thing just does nothing for me. Hell, the more I listened to it, the more indistinguishable it became. I've listened to this thing no less than 4 times, and I honestly couldn't hum you a single chorus or hook from it if you put the sheet music in my hands and a loaded gun against my head. And at 13 tracks and 50 fucking minutes long, that's a whole lot of nothing. I mean, if you like this album, I certainly won't judge you for it. You know me, that's not my style. But I just can't give good marks to an album that flows into your head when you listen to it and immediately flows out of it once you remove your earbuds. Smoke and Mirrors gets 2 things that exist. Yeah, sure, that'll do, whatever. Out of 5. Ugh, there's no worse feeling than listening to one of the hottest new releases of the year, only to find out it's the audible equivalent of an ether-soaked rag. And what really sucks is that even though there's nothing to talk about when it comes to these guys, everyone is still talking about them. This band is already overexposed enough as it is. I don't feel like I'm helping with the problem here. So instead, let's talk about a band that released an album that's the polar opposite of this one. A really interesting album by a still relatively small group that wasn't gutted to death by a serial killer wearing a Pro Tools box as a mask. That's much better. Paperhaus is an indie rock quartet based out of Washington, D.C. that released their eponymous first album about a week earlier than that other band whose album I've already completely forgotten about. What was it called? Chokin' Tears? No, whatever. Now, full disclosure here, I actually heard about this band because I happen to be very close friends with a friend of a friend of a friend of a brother of one of the band members. There's about 5 degrees of separation here, so I think that makes it okay for me to review. But trust me, I wouldn't be talking about this band if they really didn't deserve to be talked about. So what makes them worth discussing? Well, I can't remember the last time I heard post-punk rooted indie rock this gloriously rich and experimental, for one thing. These guys have a firm footing in the late 70s, early 80s era of post-punk, and they certainly aren't shy about showing their influences. The thumping bass and jumpy, flashing riff work in songs like Cairo and Untitled show more than a few threads from the jackets of bands like Talking Heads, Wire, and The Smiths, while songs like So Slow and I'll Send It To You tone things down in a bit more of a moodier fashion, a la Television, Bauhaus, or maybe even the tiniest dash of Joy Division. But while their influences certainly aren't difficult to spot, they still manage to create a sound that is completely unique and wholly theirs. The album, while having a comfort-zone-y post-punk feel in the overall composition, also carries a very swooning and swaying, almost psychedelic form of atmosphere to it. The way the reverb and delay is mixed into the guitars, and the often echoey vocals of Eduardo Rivera and Alex Teblev can either jolt you into a pogo, lull you into comfortability, or crawl across your skin in a daunting, baleful kind of way. And they have no problem pulling off every style, sometimes within the very same song. I mean, listen to songs like Misery and Surrender, and tell me you don't get a vibe that's like Echo and the Bunnymen getting a back massage from Nick Cave's red right hand. And while I can already hear some of you saying, "Oh, look at this guy slamming the mainstream band while shouting praises to an indie group that hasn't even been featured on 40 episodes of the Vampire Diaries. Careful or else you'll spill your PBR on your ironic t-shirt and unnecessary scarf there, Lucius." I could honestly care less about how mainstream a particular band may be. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't. I love Foo Fighters just as much as I love Era and the Ferns. The reason Smoke and Mirrors doesn't make me particularly moist is that I've heard it a million times before. I heard it a million times before on their last album. Hell, I heard it a million times before it was even called Imagine Dragons. S&M is an example of an album that takes no risks and zero chances. It's so safe, so unoriginal. Hell, the record executive that pre-approved all the material probably deserves more of a writing credit than the actual band does. But Paperhaus? It isn't really like much else I've heard before, at least not in a good long while. It's fresh and innovative, and it isn't afraid to take risks or show a little dirt beneath its fingernails. A ceramic bowl can have the most elegant designs and carvings on it, and have a shine and polish that makes it shimmer like the very sun. But at the end of the day, it's still just a bowl, and a bowl is useless to me unless it's got some damn Lucky Charms in it. And while Smoke and Mirrors may be shinier, Paperhaus was the much sweeter experience. It sure as hell didn't get soggy in milk. Paperhaus gets 4.5 Tom Verlaines out of 5.